Hello, my name is Lauryn Williams, and I serve as Deputy Director for the Strategic Technologies Program at CSIS. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, in partnership with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission 2.0 at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, launched the U.S. Commission on Cyber Force Generation a couple of months ago, and discussions are off and running. Today, I am excited to be joined by three cyber experts and former operators themselves. Colonel Sean Kern, who is the Director for Cyberspace Operations at SAIC, and was formerly Air Force Commander 67 Cyberspace Wing. Lieutenant Colonel Tony Siciliano, who leads elements of KC's cyber business and spent 33 years in senior roles in the Marine Corps. And Colonel Ben Ring, who was Operations Officer for the U.S. Cyber Protection Brigade and Cybercom Chief of Applied Research and Development. These experts are here today to help illuminate some of the systematic challenges facing today's operators that speak to the need for a new cyber force designed to recruit, train, and equip the best talent. Sean, Tony, and Ben, I'm really glad to have you all here today and look forward to digging into your perspectives on what is missing today to help the U.S. military best respond to growing cyber threats. What we're going to do today is share some anonymous quotes from real-life cyber warfighters who, as you know, are currently dispersed across the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Cyber Command, and within the Pentagon. Then I'm going to turn to our experts to react and draw on their personal experiences. That sounds good. Here is the first quote from a captain in the Marines highlighting challenges of leadership. So it says here, one of my worst professional experiences involved working underneath a woefully unprepared commander with a degree in culinary arts. Under no circumstances would a cyber officer be asked to lead a squadron of aircraft, and yet the opposite is true. So Sean, I am curious about your reactions to this quote. How common has it been in your career that you've experienced or heard about military cyber professionals being led by leaders without appropriate cyber or technical backgrounds for their senior roles?
Extraordinarily common. I myself worked for space ops, a fighter pilot, a bomber pilot, and like traditional signals common IT leaders. The bad part of it is that they use their professional experience and their gut intuition derived from non-cyber background and try to apply analogies to our domain. And oftentimes they're woefully inadequate. I had one example where a pilot asked me, well, why don't your squadron commanders know their level of readiness? And I said, they absolutely know their level of readiness. They don't know how to get to a get well date because there's so many things outside their control, and the corporate Air Force isn't designed to focus on readying the cyber force.
That's really helpful. And a follow-up question here for you. So if cyber leaders were required to have specific technical or operational cyber experience, what do you think that could look like?
Well, the baseline has to come growing up and experiencing the force as a second lieutenant, as a staff sergeant, senior airman, a corporal on the way up. I think we're doing a great job today on the officer side with 04s and 05s, especially in the cyber ops squadrons in the Air Force. But then there's a glass ceiling that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've talked with a lot of junior officers, and we had this conversation once on, we call 10 versus 30, 10 minutes versus 30-second conversation. So when you work for someone who's not in the tradecraft or doesn't have the background, a lot of times those junior officers will spend 10 minutes trying to explain the background, and it gets very frustrating. It's a waste of a lot of people's time, and it really bogs down operations, as opposed to when you're talking with a leader who's from the tradecraft. It's a simple 30-second conversation, then you can move on to more detailed nuances of what specific technical topic you're talking about.
It's an excellent point.
It's really helpful too. Okay, let's look at another quote here. So this one says, few, if any, qualified offensive cyber operators have graduated to positions of command like colonels or generals. This is comparable to an Air Force in which none of the colonels and generals have ever been qualified pilots, and this is from a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. So Ben, what would you say are the main forces in play that have prevented qualified offensive cyber operators from promoting to positions of leadership in their respective services? And then secondly, is this due to a culture that underemphasizes cyber expertise or a lack of visibility? or is it a matter of retention?
So if you look across the services, their promotion system is all designed around career progression paths that promote successive leadership experiences. When you're trying to grow senior officers, colonels, and generals, and admirals, you want to make sure that these officers rotate through these key developments and key positions. In the cyber community, especially in the technical cyber personnel, a lot of those folks are pulled into those hard-to-fill technical positions, a lot of which happen to not be leadership positions. So inherently, those officers are disadvantaged when they go before promotion boards. And it's not that they can't lead, it's just they're pulled into those technical positions, so they don't get those experiences. Second of all, the service promotion boards are centralized, meaning that all of the officers are pooled into one big consolidated list of candidates, and a small panel will go through all the different officers from all the different skill sets, whether it's cyber or signal or infantry or intelligence or engineering. And the panel members themselves come from all different skill sets from each of the branches within the service. So you may have one cyber officer on a panel of 25 that's selecting hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates to promote the certain number there. And they all have quotas they fill anyway, so it's not like they're not going to fill their quotas. But those officers tend to promote those positions that they understand, as opposed to the technical community promoting from within, which in the Army, I speak for the Army's perspective, the medical community is a good example. They pull all their medical officers out from the pool, and they have medical professionals promote medical candidates for promotion to more senior rank. And that's just the culture, the way the services have it, whether it's retention, impact on retention. I've looked at, I think it's both ways. You know, there's a lot of junior officers will look at the lack of upward mobility or the challenge in upward mobility and will tend to find a different path for themselves outside the service. And then because you're losing some of that top talent, you're losing some of your candidates at the senior leadership level. So
That's really, really helpful, and obviously a lot of implications there for a potential cyber service. All right, Tony, how do you think a new service might answer this problem?
So I think, Ben, you hit the nail on the head with the problems or with the diversification of some of these promotion boards. It's great for the institution writ large, but I think there's probably a corollary to like what the soft community has to deal with too. A lot of folks within the service doesn't necessarily understand the full mission and the nuances of what those missions are. So I think it goes back to culture, as mentioned. And a separate cyber service would build that culture and that inherent understanding of the mission that would lead to a better retention down the line.
That's really helpful. So let's talk about training challenges. And we have a couple more quotes here. All right. So this quote says that officers assigned to junior roles in the current cyber mission force receive no training en route to their new roles and are expected to just figure it out once they check on board. And this is from a captain serving in the U.S. Navy. So maybe Tony first, and then Sean, help us understand this in a broader context. Is the lack of training highlighted here common for the other services? If not, why do you think this has been the case across the cyber mission force?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a great quote because it really kind of highlights some of the differences and perspectives from the services. I believe the training pipelines, especially from my last experience working at Headquarters Marine Corps, the OC field or the branch management team was inside of my branch, so I was in knee deep in it every day. We were able to build out a very progressive training pipeline for both of our officers and enlisted that covered all the 1,000 level and most of the 2,000 level training that Cybercom required. But then again, we're a small service, so law of small numbers, we were able to kind of get ahead of that. I think the fact also that what we call in the Marine Corps unrestricted officers, they can be pulled to go do any job, right? So we can train a young lieutenant or a captain, that lat moves into the field, and then the next cycle they are working at a recruiting station or they're at the officer candidate school. So these tours where they come in and out, they will lose that technical consistency that they need in their job field.
Absolutely.
That's great. And Sean, your perspectives on that?
I agree with everything that Tony just said. I'd add, you sort of have to be careful generalizing to the CMF writ large. I mean, it's a diverse workforce. There are a number of work roles. For operators and exploitation analysts, it's a very stringent, very well-known process to get trained, certified, qualified on mission. On the Air Force side, where we really see a gap is our intelligence officers, much like Tony said, where they could be on aircraft 1 minute, space the next minute, and then all of a sudden they're a cyber officer and they walk into a cyber ops squadron with no understanding of the domain that they're supposed to help support. I had one intel officer, funny enough, tell me, China isn't an assignment, China is a career, right? Cyber should be exactly the same way. It's not an assignment, it's a career.
Absolutely.
That's a great example. Ben, any thoughts on this
Yeah,
as well?
so when I was back in the Cyber Protection Brigade, we'd get intel, especially intel officers and non-commissioned officers who thought they could rotate from, say, China to Russia, and they thought it was just as easy to rotate China, Russia. Now we're in the cyber domain. We'd have to train them for a year, and then have another year of really maturing into the cyber domain to where they could really be very effective analysts in that year 3 and beyond. So that was the long uphill slope that our intel analysts had to face when they came into cyber.
That's helpful too. All right, so on to another challenge, readiness. Let's look at another eye-opening quote here. So this quote is from a colonel in the U.S. Army, and it says, in fact, it was once found that about 10% of the personnel execute as many as 80% of the operational missions. So Sean, this statistic seems to imply a significant imbalance in operational capabilities. What exactly is this imbalance driven by?
I've seen this a number of times. You can slice and dice that quote a lot of different ways than people have. I would just say this, there's several points. One, there's a systemic issue in readiness where it's a closed force, right? And we have basics, seniors, and masters. Well, you have a few basics by design, a lot of seniors by design, and a handful of masters by design. Well, how do you make a lot of seniors when you don't have a lot of basics? Because how long does it take to make a 12-year tech sergeant in the Air Force? 12 years, right? So it's hard to kind of speed that up. The second point, maybe even I should have led in with this, is our readiness is a function of being presented 100% of the time to U.S. Cyber Command and employed 100% of the time. So when you look at the team structure, you'll see mission elements, and it'll say, on duty, on duty, on duty, training, reconstitution. That is predicated on 100% manning rate, which almost no force gets. And I can't even find a force in the DoD where they're presented 100% of the time and employed 100% of the time. So when you hear some people make the distinction of the staff that employs the force should be different than the staff that generates the force, that really comes to a head at that point.
That's really helpful. Tony or Ben, reactions to this quote as well?
No, I completely agree. I mean, so back in the day when that was part of the effort that was redesign the defensive cyber force, we built a lot of this into the force structure. And the mindset back then was that we would be able to pull some of these unicorns off of mission and rotate them back into the institutional roles to be the instructors or the senior trainers. And the problem is you could never pull them off mission because they always had to be on mission. So those unicorns were always focused on mission, so you could never pull them out to really grow the next generation. And it was just a never-ending slippery slope we couldn't get out of.
Yeah, the most critical work roles we had were very, very difficult to generate because we needed them to generate the range content that they could actually train and qualify on rather than using real-world missions, which could really be constraining. But we couldn't pull them off the line and have them build that, operationally relevant, very realistic training environment that would lead the rest of the force through the path they had taken.
Yeah, no, it just further emphasizes some of these key training challenges. We'll go to a next quote here and dig in a little bit more. So this quote says, "Not since the cyber mission forces reached full operational capability, or FOC, in 2018, have our units achieved the same level of readiness? To date, readiness across our teams, especially in offensive cyber units, continues to decline. And this is a perspective from a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force. So Ben, what is your take on specific structural or organizational challenges that have kept the cyber mission forces from maintaining, or better yet, building on the 2018 readiness levels?
So I just want to take everyone back about those 7 to 8 years to the time frame. At that time, the force was really structured on how do we get to full operation, FOC, fully operation capable. So all the teams that were building were focused purely on training to get to that fully operational status. Once the force achieved that fully operational status in 2018, the readiness model changed to annual readiness commensurate with the rest of the Department of Defense for presenting forces to conduct operations. The other key difference is I think the operational tempo changed significantly. If you look back historically, the number of missions that the teams ran back in 2018 is nothing compared to what they're doing today. And it's just a factor of society, the threat has increased, op tempo, everything has just increased. So the teams and the soldiers, the sailors, and the airmen and the Marines are just focused on operations and keeping their head above the water. Which goes back to we can't pull teams off mission, we can't rotate the people through, we can't get to 100% personnel so that we can get to that point where we can have a training force and an operating force, we can rotate through a operate, train, recovery phases, which is we tried to design in the force back in the day.
Yeah, I think you make a great point about the threat changing and growing exponentially, and specifically from the PRC, People's Republic of China. Absolutely. Tony, any thoughts there?
No, again, I think you hit it on the head. We felt this, in I think all of our services. We began with the red, green, and yellow cycles. Team would come back off mission. We would tell them, now you can reconstitute. Go get that training that you need. You learned something on this mission, but then immediately a new mission would come out, and they don't even have time to do that. Not even internally within the teams, where we could get a mission element to take a break and go back and reconstitute. All of them would get assigned to a new mission all the time. Leads to burnout. So frustrating.
And if I get just one thing that's unique to the cyber domain, in other domains of warfare, the general tasks don't change that much over time.
That's right.
Right? I mean, firing a rifle doesn't change. Basic first aid doesn't change that much. In the cyber domain, it changes significantly. So if you look at the domain of knowledge that a soldier or an airman or an officer had to know 7 years ago, they still have to know the basics of networking and operating systems. But now you're adding more technology. Now you have to know about cloud and artificial intelligence and Internet of Things. So that body of knowledge keeps growing over time, which further compounds the readiness challenges.
And a lot of that expertise is in the private sector. We need to understand what's happening there as well. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about another really important issue challenging cyber personnel today, which is culture, and we've talked about it quite a bit throughout the other parts of the discussion. So here is a quote, which says, I've seen senior warfighting leaders dismissively call cyber research book reports, they call cyber operators nerds, and cyber capability development science projects. And this is from a colonel in the U.S. Army. So let me ask both Sean and Ben your reactions to this really interesting quote. And it's clear that a cross-service culture that doesn't quite understand or appreciate cyber expertise could undermine how effectively cyber operations are integrated into traditional military planning. And this is really a cultural challenge. Can you lay out for us what the actual impacts of the lack of integration has looked like in reality? We'll go to Sean first.
I've been fairly lucky. I haven't seen leaders be dismissive of the talents of our cyber operators and the cyber mission force writ large. I kind of come back to how I started under leadership, where the key issue is that they just misapply their knowledge in other domains and assume that it should work here. One simple example is if there's an Air Force pilot shortage, the Air Force figures out how to solve an Air Force pilot shortage. But if you have a shortage in a critical work role in the cyber mission force, I literally had them come to me and say, well, you're the wing commander, you have all the forces, go figure out how we should recruit for this critical work role across the nation without any resourcing to do so. So it lands on an 06 at a wing level when if we had a pilot shortage, it would start at headquarters and work its way all the way down through the MAGCOM. So I don't know if that's dismissive, but it certainly seems to relegate the importance and maybe the ease by which we should be able to recruit for the cyber domain in ways that don't make sense operationally.
Yeah, that's helpful. Ben, what are your perspectives?
So first off, not my quote.
Good to clarify.
I think this. So part of the thing, I think the cyber community is just ahead of the power curve in terms of technology being more advanced, being more cutting edge. And a lot of that is kind of new to those outside the community. So to an infantry or an aviator officer, they might be a little bit dismissive at first, but I think over time, I think attitudes change over time. I know 8-9 years ago, people thought I was a nerd for getting into data and applying data first, but now you go look across the Army, you've got leaders, generals, all interested in data. In fact, I think some of the challenges now, we've gone the opposite end of the spectrum to where people go to a 1-week class on artificial intelligence, and now they're all of a sudden an expert on artificial intelligence. So I think this pendulum goes both ways, but I think it's very interesting to see how these conversations change over time.
Yeah. And we're really at a cusp where if you look at, so as a career airman, I look at the interwar period between World War I and World War II, we were looking at should there be a separate Air Force. And I'm not the first to say this, but most airmen were saying we needed air-minded leaders to fully appreciate the capacity and capability of an Air Force. Otherwise, it would be retained in the Army, and the Army would make it all about close air support. We'd never see strategic bombing. So if you don't find a way to create a cyber-minded force with the domain that we have today, then you're going to always be constrained by the very nature of the requirements of a service, if it's Navy, if it's Marines, if it's on the ground, to in service to that, as opposed to being potentially a supported operation. It'll just always be subordinate.
And both of your comments and yours just now, Sean, make me think about how you might have been able to insert, space for cyber in this quote in the past, and how space was seen as a kind of science fiction domain or only for science and exploration. But obviously, over the last many years, and including through the creation of a Space Force, we've talked much more about space as a warfighting domain and the need to consolidate our expertise. So I think a lot of parallels in that experience for cyberspace today. So on to Tony. What would you say? Would a dedicated cyber force help shift perceptions of cyber as a nerdy fringe capability to a critical element of modern warfighting?
And it's the word's been mentioned so many times, culture, right? We come back to the foundational missions of each of the services. The Army for the land warfare, air domain, naval force projection. And now even with Space Force, that unique domain, that unique space that they occupy. We talked earlier about commanders who may or may not understand what it is the cyber folks really do. And also, within the cyber mission force, I don't know that I necessarily experienced those kind of phrases, but in the Fleet Marine Force, at the operational level, when a commander says, I have this mission I need to accomplish, cyber guy, what can you do for me? And if there's a hesitation or an it's like, okay, I can just destroy it. I don't need that. So understanding where the cyber folks can bring that unique skill set to the table for an operational victory is, I think, really, really important. And I think the cyber service will do that.
That's really helpful.
At the strategic level, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's look at one last quote here. And this one says, I have seen Army soldiers whose jobs are to find cyber intrusions in critical infrastructure, removed from the workplace for a week to conduct land navigation training. I have seen Navy sailors whose jobs are to conduct offensive operations in cyberspace, removed from the workspace multiple days each month to stand watch at buildings on military installations. And this is a quote from a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy. So Ben, this quote illustrates all of the deeply ingrained cultural challenges. What's your response?
Yeah, I'm going to offer both perspectives on this quote. It's very interesting. I'm going to offer both perspectives. So first off, it's disheartening to pull soldiers or airmen off of critical missions to go do basic soldier skills or basic training tasks. It's even more disheartening when you have to go send them to guard gates at the post. And full disclosure, I actually once did that. So it is disheartening. However, I'll say that there's the other perspective, right? Because you want them to spend 100% of their time focused on training or the operations in the cyber domain. The other perspective, I'll offer this. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines all wear uniform. They all are in service in defense of the nation, to meet the mission, to defeat enemy threats in order to defend the nation. And part of that is a warrior ethos. And there is some training that they need that you have to make sure you instill so you build the right culture. If you're going to have a cyber force, you have to build that culture. Now, they don't need to be guarding gates. I understand that. Do they need land navigation or celestial navigation? I don't know. You know, I don't think it's probably outside the scope of what we're discussing here, but I think there is a balance. And I think whatever cyber force, whatever culture we're going to build has to have that right warrior ethos in order to defeat enemy threats in the cyber domain.
Absolutely, that's really helpful. So let's kind of wrap up the discussion here. So I'll go to Sean first, and then Tony, and then Ben. How would establishing a U.S. cyber force lead to better usage and utilization and appreciation of cyber operators' time and expertise, as we've been discussing so far?
Yeah.
You first.
Keep it pretty short. So I haven't seen a senior leader in the last several years not say somewhere in the course of a public statement, you know, that in crisis and conflict, we would expect it to start in space and cyberspace. Right? Well, we have a space force. We don't have a cyber force. Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon shows us that our enemies are prepositioning to create massive effect at a time and place of their choosing in support of the ops tempo of their campaigns. They're pretty successful. The cyber force would blunt that.
Over to you, Ben.
So let me offer some wisdom for the last 3 years. My last 3 years in the Army was in the Army staff in the Pentagon. And I had a firsthand experience of how the Army runs, which is literally a 500-page book on all the processes and the institutional processes that make the Army run. That entire process, that massive machine, as slow and bureaucratic as it is actually well optimized specifically to produce land component capabilities for warfare. And it is well designed, it is synchronized across the entire Army. And I think if you had a cyber force, that force could create its own institutional processes, its own culture that could be tailored to providing and producing cyber capabilities for the nation.
Absolutely. Okay, Tony, what are your thoughts?
You know, I think it's a question of kind of respecting the talent. You know, we have a lot of time, effort, and money put into very brilliant, very capable operators, and to force them into you know, the square peg into a round hole of the industrial age kind of constructs that the services have been built into isn't fair, and it doesn't meet the mission. Establishing that cyber force, not only would it help build out those pipelines, and again, culture, it would absolutely give us a laser focus on the mission and what we require out of our cyber forces. So.
That's fantastic. So Sean, Ben, and Tony, thanks to you all for joining me for an incredibly enlightening conversation around real-life cyber challenges that are illuminated to us by real-life cyber operators that we're being faced with today across the current military services. It's very clear from the quotes and your unique perspectives that building capable, effective U.S. cyber forces requires new thinking about leadership, training, readiness, and culture, all of which we discussed and could discuss a lot more today. Addressing existing challenges in these areas is going to be essential to building the best trained and equipped cyber warfighters. Thanks to our audience for joining us today, and you can head to the CSIS Strategic Technologies Program website to follow all the latest developments on the Commission on U.S. Cyber Force Generation.